Good evening. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us for the State of the Resistance, an update from the front lines. I want to start by thanking all of the co-sponsors of the event tonight, and in particular, Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, Senator Krueger, and their staffs. Yes, please. I see some familiar faces in the audience, but for those who don't know me, I am a city councilman from the east side of Manhattan. My name is Dan Garodnick, and I represent about 170,000 people in Manhattan. The district runs from 14th Street to 98th Street, and you're actually in it right now. My district also includes many parts of Midtown, including Trump Tower, I mean, it wasn't necessarily a laugh line or a boo line, but I'll take it. The longtime home, of course, of our current president. Tonight, we are going to have an update from the front lines of the resistance and hear from two important leaders who I will introduce in a moment. On these front lines, we are waging a battle for the very ideals that are most central to who we are as a nation, as a state, and certainly as a city. And if you are anything like me, you run for cover every time your phone beeps with a breaking news alert. With every tweet, lie, or hand swat, so many people are rightly asking how long this is going to go on, whether we can survive this, and also, frankly, whether he can survive this. The president has done some pretty irresponsible things since he came in. He vowed to shut our doors to refugees, trampling on our values of a nation that has prided itself on being a refuge for people who yearn to breathe free. He hired as his national security advisor a man who he knew was under investigation for ties to a foreign nation, and then asked the FBI director to go easy on him. And then, of course, he fired the FBI director. He shared highly sensitive intelligence with an enemy state, jeopardizing the safety of individuals worldwide and tarnishing our reputation in the global arena. And God knows what he did with Russia. He has time and again vilified immigrants, Muslims, and women, legitimizing a culture of hate and violence that has reared its ugly head in all corners of our country. With Trump's support, House Republicans have delivered a health care bill, which is an egregious assault on public health as a nation that would leave millions of Americans without access to medical care. And if you haven't seen it in the last hour, the Congressional Budget Office released their score on this bill, and it said that, surely, 23 million Americans would lose their health insurance by 2026 if the House bill were to go into effect. No surprise there, but that is a real and shockingly significant number, and one that we hope now the Senate will address. We have the recently released Trump budget, which among other things includes some winners like cutting Medicaid by more than $800 billion and SNAP or food stamp benefits by 29%. It's a slap in the face to the working families of America. It's cruel, and it is just plain wrong. And I might note all of this is having a terrible effect on New York City. Not just the budget cuts, which has a real impact on a city which gets 10% of our budget from the federal government, but the tenor of Washington is actually keeping visitors away from New York. They just don't want to come. It's not about New York, but they don't want to come here to the United States. I chair the Economic Development Committee in the Council. We had a hearing recently and revealed that we are going to see a swing of $1.4 billion in decreased spending over what was anticipated by foreign visitors. $1.4 billion in spending. That doesn't even account for all of the economic activity that happens that goes along with $1.4 billion in spending. So that's the flavor of how things look on the front lines, and it ain't pretty. So if that is what we're up against, then what is the state of the resistance? Well, you're going to hear more from the Attorney General and the Senator in a moment, but there are a few reasons for encouragement there, as I see it. The state of the resistance is that 3.2 million Americans participated in more than 300 individual women's marches across the United States in January. And that included more than 400,000 people right here in New York City. The state of the resistance is the burst of local activism from passionate citizens, educating their neighbors, holding elected officials accountable at town hall meetings, and among other feats, breaking the all-time record for the number of calls made to our representatives in Congress. In February, Senator Schumer's office said that nearly 1.5 million calls a day were made to the United States Senate alone. That is a lot of calls. And the state of the resistance is that countless bold and brave local elected officials have put themselves on the front lines protecting our New York and American values. And I am happy to introduce two of them here tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about them. State Senator Liz Krueger and Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. My good friend Liz Krueger is the state senator representing the Upper East Side of Manhattan and parts of Midtown. She is a tenacious fighter. She is well respected both here and in Albany. She is one of the strongest champions that we have for sexual health and women's rights in New York State and for good government reforms up in Albany. Senator Krueger recently introduced legislation to update the state's Equal Rights Amendment, which at the moment does not provide protections on the basis of national origin, sex, or sexual orientation, or age. She's also the prime sponsor of the Reproductive Health Act. You might not... Many people do not realize that New York State's abortion law has not been updated since 1970, and it not only falls short of the constitutional protections defined by Roe v. Wade, but it also does not even reflect current medical practices. Senator Krueger is rightly working to address this. She is also the prime sponsor of a bill that would eliminate the stipends paid out to senators on top of their mandated salaries, something in the news these days. Senator Krueger has a knack for staying independent and clear-headed, something extremely difficult to do in Albany, and she is a great and tenacious fighter. And speaking of a fighter, let me move on to our other speaker this evening, our New York State Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman. Eric Schneiderman has taken on the Trump Foundation and Trump University, but his work as Attorney General has been wide-ranging and full of important victories since he began 6 years ago. Attorney General Schneiderman is not only the highest-ranking law enforcement officer for the state, responsible for representing New York and its residents in legal matters, but is also a regulator and advocate ensuring equal rights and protections and fairness for all New Yorkers. He has worked hard to create a fair economy that works for all of us, securing more than $30 million for more than 21,000 New Yorkers who had been stiffed by their employers. He ensured that New Yorkers received the $550 million that we were owed by Big Tobacco to compensate for the public health costs of smoking-related illnesses. But his work extends beyond the borders of New York. He's been a leader in uniting the Democratic attorneys general all across this country, standing up for American values and fighting back against the highly destructive policies of the Trump administration. He led a coalition of 16 attorneys general urging Congress to reject Trump's rollback of critical, proactive ozone air quality standards, and he coordinated 19 attorneys general in filing a legal brief in support of Gavin Grimm, who is a transgender student fighting discrimination by his school district. He successfully sued, along with other state attorneys general, to block the president's unconstitutional and un-American Muslim ban. I could, of course, with both of these terrific elected officials, go on, but I'm not going to do that. There will be tough fights ahead, but with bold and brave leaders like the two that you're about to hear from, I know that we are always going to have a fighting chance here. And certainly, we will celebrate some well-deserved victories. So, without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Attorney General Eric Schneiderman and State Senator Liz Krueger.
Thank you, Dan.
Good luck.
Thanks. Good evening. Thank you. Very nice.
Well, we should quit while we're ahead.
I know. The Senate Republicans didn't treat me like that earlier today.
My mic works, yes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank the CUNY Graduate Center for opening up this fabulous auditorium for us so that we can have this conversation tonight. I, of course, want to thank our friend Dan Garodnick, who did a terrific job giving you an overview of the potential discussion, where we are, and even updates from the Congressional Budget Office just a few minutes ago. I particularly want to thank Eric Schneiderman, who we're going to hear quite a bit from now. Eric is obviously the Attorney General of the state of New York, but what people may not know, and I'm not going to tell you the whole story, is I'm in politics because of Eric Schneiderman. He called me at home one night and tried to convince me to run, and I actually ended up doing it. He's very persuasive, it turns out. So we know there's such troubling news from Washington, D.C. Every morning, I bet you do exactly what I do. You get up in the morning, you read whatever sources of news you get your actual factual news from, and you just take a deep breath and hope that we're all still here on the earth by the evening. And then the next morning, we're so upset about something we learned that we even forget what we thought was the end of the world the day before, right? I mean, it's not just me. We're all having this sense of what the hell is happening to our country and our government and the risks to our world. And we're New Yorkers. We think we're this fabulous, progressive group of people, we are here, who know how to get things done the right way, who know how to fight back, and who know, hopefully, how to move this country back in the direction that it needs to go as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to take some time to ask Eric some questions that we feel are really probably on all of your minds, and then he's going to do a question back and forth. Then later on, there'll be an opportunity for your questions to be asked, and we're going to be handing out cards. I have staff who will go up and down the aisles handing out cards. If you have a question and you want to write it down, they'll then bring it to me. I can guarantee you there's about 400 people here. There will not be time for 400 questions, but I bet you'll find that any number of the critical issues you wanted to ask, we actually get to already. So I apologize in advance that we won't have a chance to get to all of your questions. But if people know Eric, they also know that there's all kinds of ways to learn of the work he's doing and to submit questions to the Attorney General's office. And he has a fabulous website. It's probably the best thing to direct you to. So even if you can't get any of the things you wanted to ask tonight, trust me, if you haven't met Eric Schneiderman or had a chance to hear from him, you will see after tonight why we all should be so proud of the Attorney General of New York State. Yes. Okay. So Eric, there's a lot of discussion about fears for immigrants and their rights, the rights of states. What does it mean to be a sanctuary city? What can we do or not do to protect people who live here in New York State? So can you talk a little bit about your role as the AG in explaining what our protections are, even if the federal government is going the wrong direction.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Liz, and thank you all for coming out. I am also joined here by a few people from my office, Peter Washburn from my Environmental Protection Bureau, Lourdes Rosado from my Civil Rights Bureau, and a few others. So we have a great team in the office, and as you will see from the volume of incoming, sort of like a volcano of bad ideas in Washington, this just keeps coming out. We have a lot of good people working on all different fronts. But immigration is an area I'm happy to talk about because it's an area where we've had actually substantial success in beating some of the major initiatives of the Trump administration. And it's something where I think we will continue to have success, which is tremendously important to those of us in the state of New York. So in January, anticipating an attack on sanctuary jurisdictions because of Mr. Trump's campaign and my long familiarity with him as a fraud defendant, litigant, et cetera, I didn't expect him to change his ways, as some people were hoping. We issued a guidance, and we're the first office in the country to do it, telling all local governments what you have to do under federal law and what you don't have to do, and how you can be a jurisdiction that protects immigrants without violating federal law. So we've worked with local governments around New York to rewrite their sanctuary resolutions and local laws, and are prepared to work with them on protecting themselves. One of the things that we said in January, and we issued another update to our guidance in March, is that there are severe restrictions on the federal government's ability to cut back funds to local governments. There was a lot of chest pounding and rhetoric about we're going to take away all your money and you're going to have to comply with this, and essentially it's just not true. And so we lay out in the guidance that the federal government can't revoke money retroactively. It has to be a clear condition of a grant going in. You can't, and this is a decision by Justice Roberts in the Affordable Care Act case, you can't use the revocation of funds in a coercive way. You can't make it something that coerces a state into doing something, and it can't be any pot of money. You can't, because of your disagreement with a city about immigration policy, take away health care funding or child care funding. So we laid out all these parameters, and there really are, under current law, a lot of ways in which, without violating one federal statute or one federal regulation, a local government can avoid what I think is a law enforcement problem more than anything else. If law enforcement is perceived as a branch of the immigration authorities, if it's perceived as a branch of ICE, and you're in a community with a substantial number of immigrants, witnesses won't come forward, victims won't come forward. It's a serious issue. And to me, local law enforcement agencies like the NYPD should be allowed to make determinations of what makes us safer. And in New York, we are the safest big city in the country. We are a sanctuary jurisdiction. Those two things go together. It's not a coincidence. So we issued that guidance, and after a lot of the chest pounding, and they started issuing these detainer reports purportedly showing that if you released, trying to find immigrants who had been released and then gone on to commit crimes, but they were so riddled with inaccuracies, they released 3 reports and then had to stop. So we worked with these different jurisdictions, and then in a court case several weeks ago, we won a major victory, and it was by a federal district court in California responding to exactly these issues, and the judge issued a ruling that severely limits the federal government's ability to punish jurisdictions. And in that case, the Justice Department ended up taking the position, well, our immigration order really doesn't do that much, and in spite of all the rhetoric, we're really not trying to impose big burdens. And to my great satisfaction, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, a couple of days ago, had to issue a letter saying, essentially, never mind, saying, that we realize that the section of the federal law has very limited reach, and we're, not asking anybody to do anything beyond that. So our office issued a report that we think has been part led to this, providing rebuttals to all of these assertions about sanctuary jurisdictions, examples from law enforcement of successes, all the cases in which the critical witnesses were undocumented immigrants who would not come forward, statistics, reports from sheriff's departments, local law enforcement officials, a lot of folks who you would not ordinarily think of as being, particularly on the progressive bandwagon, but this is a serious issue. So we've had good success with that. They will continue to try and expand the law to impose more burdens on sanctuary jurisdictions, but this is an area where we step to them and step to them effectively. Right. And so that's something that I'm proud of the work that we've done. The second area of immigration where we've had even more dramatic success was, as you noted, when they issued the January 27th ban on immigration, this unconstitutional ban clearly designed to discriminate on people based on religion as well as nationality. That was on a Friday evening, and I sat there on the phone, and we were talking to my counterparts in other states and talking to lawyers who were thousands of lawyers just going out to airports to see if there was someone they could represent, going to immigration centers and volunteering. And this was really the beginning of what I call the legal resistance, that there's this sense in the legal community of attorneys general, lawyers for local governments, lawyers for nonprofits, and a lot of members of the private bar, that this order and other things that they've done since then are offensive in a more fundamental way than the mean-spiritedness or the bias. It shows total disregard for the rule of law. And for those of us who view ourselves as guardians of the rule of law, that makes you want to fight. So that was a Friday night. By Sunday morning, I had 17 attorneys general representing more than 130 million people to issue a statement because the federal government was coming out with total confusion. There was an article written about the order and how it was rolled out called "Malevolence Tempered by Incompetence," and that sort of captures that moment to me and a lot of things about this administration, actually, if you want to think about it. But malevolence tempered by incompetence, the federal government wasn't telling the truth, so we came out with a statement: this is unconstitutional. We will go to court to stop it. Between now and then, we will have to mitigate the harm to people. And then we did, and we went into courts all around the country, figured out who had the best shot to get a national injunction, turned out to be Washington State, doubled down there, got an injunction, got it upheld by the Court of Appeals. They backed away and tried to draft a much dialed-back second incarnation of the immigration ban. We went into courts in different states, got injunctions in Maryland and Hawaii, and we've just had appellate arguments on that, and I'm optimistic about it. But that was a great example of the legal resistance, of attorneys general, of the lawyers getting in front of judges who would uphold the rule of law. And the fact that the president has this propensity for poking his finger in the eyes of judges he disagrees with is not really a good plan for success in litigation. This is sort of in the category of nightmare client if you're a lawyer. But the decisions were really powerful decisions. And in fact, the Ninth Circuit said something which is going to be critical to a lot of these fights going forward, where they said the procedural protections provided by the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause are not limited to citizens. They apply to all persons within the United States, including aliens, regardless of whether their presence here is lawful, unlawful, temporary, or permanent. That is the law, and that's something we're going to uphold.
Great. Thank you. You know, we could stay on immigration issues, but I want to, because we have so many issues, I want to jump to, I think, an issue that matters to most of us. Actually, it matters to all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, which is environmental law and environmental protections. And we have a president who ran on a campaign of saying he was undoing environmental law, who ran on a campaign of saying he was going to pull us out of the Paris climate agreement. Although I heard on the news tonight when he met with the Pope today, apparently he's rethinking. So, okay, it's, you know, we'll see. We'll see. He gave the Pope Martin Luther King books. Wasn't that nice? But I'm just saying, somebody said give him Martin Luther King books. So, but clean water rules specifically and the Clean Power Plan, how does that impact us given what's happening in Washington, and what's the role of the AG in protecting specifically this provision that matters so much?
Yeah, this is tremendously important because one area in which they can do a lot of damage. I mean, you know, I am of the belief that we work our way through this, and that the movement that is forming now, that this the resistance is morphing into a movement for positive progressive change. And we can see this as people weigh in all these special elections and weigh in legislatively and harass elected officials to a degree unheard of on our side of the aisle, and good thing in about time. I think that we have tremendous potential out of this, but there's some things you can't undo. And harm to the environment is one of those things. And we're in a very, we have a lot of momentum going for us in the fight against climate change. The energy sector is transforming. We're moving towards clean energy, towards renewables globally at an incredibly rapid rate, and we have to maintain that progress. Now, in the face of this, we've got virulent climate change deniers now being put in charge of the key agencies. The head of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, who was the Oklahoma AG, and he and I were always in litigation against each other and leading different groups of states. They are out to unwind everything they can. So we have intervened in several of these cases, because in many situations, states do have standing. And we're of the view that if the federal government is not going to defend a federal law, because the Obama administration was defending the Clean Power Plan and other things, then the states, we need to intervene so there is someone there who's watching out for the environment, watching out for the people we represent. So whenever we have the opportunity to do that, we have done so. We have intervened in the litigation related to the waters of the U.S. Or the Clean Water Rule, which is an effort to expand to tributaries and other streams. So we have full protection of the federal laws relating to water pollution. Our office is in that case, along with other states. The Clean Power Plan is really the signature program of the Obama administration on climate change. And the Clean Power Plan and its accompanying rule about new power plants is an effort to change the way we generate electricity and drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels to generate electricity. That is something that there was litigation brought challenging it before it even went into effect. I led a group of 25 state and local governments to intervene. We are in the case, and we are going to defend it. Now, it has been stayed, but there's an argument in the Supreme Court about whether the stay should be lifted and we should go forward with it. In the meantime, it is critically important to understand that we do have state programs that are continuing to move us towards a cleaner energy future. In New York, we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is something that we started here, which is a multi-state carbon exchange that is helping us to transform our energy sector. And we are bringing down, reducing fossil fuel emissions in New York, and we have very ambitious goals for it. So we have intervened in these cases, and there are several signs of victory. The Clean Power Plan is something that is not just optional. The Supreme Court ruled that the EPA had to regulate, that under the Clean Air Act, has to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So, and I say this because I know they don't like it, but I know that if they repeal it, they have to replace it. And that didn't go so well with them with healthcare. But that's really true of climate change also. This is not something that the EPA just made up. This is something that they're required to do. Greenhouse gases are something that is covered by the Clean Air Act. The Supreme Court has ruled on that. They're going to have to take some further action. So we intend to fight them on this in court. And to the extent that they try to knock out these provisions, we're going to insist that they follow the law, and they have to come up with their own version of the Clean Power Plan. And we're still waiting for them to come up with some credible response to the health care plan that they're trying to repeal. I think they're going to have similar problems when it comes to this.
We have to win on this one. So, reproductive health. You and I have both done a lot of work in reproductive health in our lives. And what you and I both know, and hopefully a lot of you in the audience know, is that New York State has incredibly outdated laws on reproductive health. But we've always counted on, or for 43 years, counted on Roe v. Wade, maybe 45 years now, and the fact that we all think we're protected in this country on reproductive health because of a Supreme Court decision. Tell me, one, what you think would happen if and when the Supreme Court actually either overturns Roe v. Wade or makes a decision in another case that has the impact of challenging Roe v. Wade. One, what could we do about it here at home? And are there things that AGs around the country could and should be doing now in organizing to protect women's rights all over the country?
Sure. This is tremendously important because the administration clearly is out to get immigrants, but in a sense in which we just really have not seen in this country, there is this deep strain of sort of misogyny in a lot of their policies. They're just out there. Women's rights are something that seems to rub these guys the wrong way, and reproductive health rights particularly. Now, in New York, we have abortion was made legal in New York before Roe v. Wade. So our laws preceded that. We'll work hard to see that Roe is not overturned. I don't think it will be in any time in the foreseeable future. But New York, abortion would be legal in New York. Now, the challenge is that when we passed our law back in the early 70s, it was really an amendment to the penal law, an amendment to the murder statute. So it's essentially, we did not, after Roe came down, amend our laws to put it in the public health law and to codify the rules of Roe v. Wade clearly and make it, clean up the sort of sloppiness of this. Courts have interpreted the law in line with Roe, which is fine. So I think the Reproductive Health Act, is that your bill?
Yes.
So there is a bill to codify Roe v. Wade, which we should pass. In the absence of that, last year I was asked to issue an Attorney General's opinion, which absent a judicial ruling is, the closest you get to an interpretation of New York law, saying that any court is obliged to interpret our penal law provision and our public health laws in accordance with Roe. So abortion will be legal here, but we should codify it and protect and pass the Reproductive Health Act, which has passed the Assembly and should be an issue as we head into the raucous elections of 2018, which is going to be, they say these are elections of the lifetime. This one is going to be it. I mean, so this is tremendously important. And in the meantime, we are asserting as aggressively as we can the fact that women, until Roe changes, they do have a constitutional right to this. They may not like it, but it is a constitutional right. When they came out with this horrendous health care bill that passed the House, and then they went and had like the frat party at the White House afterwards, so I immediately came out and said, look, this is a bill because it did include provisions to defund reproductive health services and to prohibit states from providing funding for things like sexually transmitted disease screening to an organization just because it also provided reproductive health services. So to us, we said we will challenge this in court because whether you like it or not, a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion. You cannot put an undue burden on a constitutional right, and you can't put unconstitutional conditions on a state's funding decision. So we've laid down a marker and said that we're going to challenge any provision of any health care bill you do that interferes with a woman's constitutional rights. We have to be vigilant about protecting that, and at the same time, we have to recognize the tremendous importance of the states. We've sort of jumped over this and got right into the substance, but the essential unit of the United States of America has always been the state. Tremendous power is retained at the state level. States created the federal government, states create local governments. So the assertion by my office and my colleagues in state offices around the country of ourselves as this second line of defense, we've really emerged as a check on overreach by the White House in a way that has not happened before because traditionally, even when they were of the same party, Congress would impose some checks, institutional checks on the White House. The guys in Congress don't seem willing to do that. We're not willing to sit by and let it happen. So if they won't do it, the next level down is the state. So it's very important to recognize that states can fill in the gaps where the federal government won't enforce the laws. I hope no one's out here sitting, holding their breath, waiting for Jeff Sessions to get aggressive about the civil rights laws. But we can enforce them at the state level. We can fight back as we sued them on the travel ban, as we've intervened in the Clean Power Plan case, the Waters of the U.S. case, and cases related to the Affordable Care Act and health care. So we can do that. And also states can model and this is really important to the work you do in Albany, we have to model smart progressive governance. We have to show a better way. If smart progressive governance is not being modeled at the federal level, we can do it at the state level, and that's something that's tremendously important. So I commend to you the renewed interest in state governments. There are people paying attention to special elections in state legislative races all over the country. It was national news that we had an election in the Assembly in New York yesterday, and in New Hampshire, the Democrats won both. And Liz and I know, as people who spent a lot of years trying to get people to pay attention to special elections in state legislatures, it was harder to do then than it is now. People are tuning in, and it has to happen. It has to happen. So I could thank you for focusing on that. The states are where the action is right now, and we do have to take over state governments from the ground up as a part of taking back the country.
So we jumped from reproductive health, and you tied it into the ACA because, as you pointed out, under the bill, the House of Representatives passed. They had a drinking party in the Rose Garden, but hopefully the Senate will know better. So it would go after the entire package of health benefits that people now assume are their rights in the United States of America. Would New York State have the ability to continue to guarantee these benefits in the state of New York, even if Washington's crazy enough to pass that awful bill in both houses and get it signed?
Well,
what could we do to assure?
We would be able to guarantee some things. It's a matter of cost. Now, the good news is the Senate wants nothing to do with this House bill. I mean, this is just, this was a bad vote that hopefully will come back to haunt people come election time. But look, as I think Dan was mentioning earlier, it cost millions and millions of people their benefits. And interestingly enough, at the end of the day, the whole fight, and you could not work harder to demonize something that they did about the Affordable Care Act, right? I mean, Obamacare, they worked overtime and did not leave any stone unturned in trying to turn this into a bad thing in the minds of the American people. At the end of the day, with that fight and then this fight over the bad House bill, more Americans, I think, this has now been borne out in polling, believe that health care is a right than have ever believed that before. And that's tremendously important. That represents real progress. So, I don't think the American people are willing to take a dial back. In New York, we used to have 10% of our population uninsured. Now we're down to 5%. 3.6 million people use the New York Health Exchange, tremendously successful. So the efforts to undo the Affordable Care Act, there was litigation brought by the House of Representatives challenging it in Washington, D.C., and it's now in the Circuit Court of Appeals there. So a coalition of states led by my office in California intervened in that case just in the last week, and the administration is trying to kick the can down the road and say, well, let's just delay doing anything in the hopes that this would just destabilize the insurance marketplace, which they can do just by being irresponsible. We have intervened to say we will defend this if they don't, and we're hoping that our motion to intervene will be granted. But I don't think the American people are going to take a dial back. I think consciousness has moved forward, and the confrontation is bringing a lot of stuff to the fore. People, keep this in mind. Here's the fundamental point never to lose sight of. If they actually enact the policies they say they want to enact, it will have a devastating effect on the people who voted for them, right? It's like, that's true across the board. That is true in all of these areas. So failure and having them be seen as us blocking them from doing something in some ways is preferable in some of these cases to them actually doing something and then seeing the consequences of it. So I think what you're looking at is an increasing paralysis of the Republicans in Congress as they contemplate this spectacle of the leader of their party, tweeting and running around and saying things and firing people and contradicting himself and getting investigated and getting investigated and getting investigated. And so this is not sitting well with the Republicans in Congress, and I do look forward to more fraying of that coalition and people moving further away. I think that's what's in store.
So you've spent a lot of your career working on building coalitions, helping people understand the long story as well as the short story, and how you move government in the right direction. We unfortunately are living during a period where it's all going the wrong direction, at least in Washington right now. And people are angry, scared, upset. You know, you pretty much put a sign up that there's a discussion of resistance, and you just use the word resistance, and you fill whatever hall you've taken, as we're seeing tonight. I know you really came to hear Eric, but you really do, right? People, they want to know what they can do. They want to understand what do we do to fight back effectively. You know, yes, you're describing, and thank God people like you exist, that there are checks and balances built into our Constitution, and some of us actually believe there is a Constitution that needs to be followed. But help us understand what we can all do to be fighting back and moving us forward at the same time, because that's what we need to know. What do we need to do?
That's tremendously important, because look, we're not going to succeed in taking the country back just by being in opposition. We have to stand for something. We have to tell people how we're going to make their lives better, and I think that's tremendously important going forward. But it's important to understand the depth of the problem. And I wrote a piece in December about the loss of control at the state level and what that meant to the country, and focusing on the fact that state after state, after the Republicans took control of the legislature and the governor's mansion, because Democrats really were not spending the money and spending the time and competing in those spheres. We lost a lot of ground over the last 10 years at the state level. That gave them the power to pass voter suppression laws, and I use the example of Wisconsin, which Trump won by 25,000 votes, but 300,000 people couldn't qualify for the new voter ID law that they enacted. That gives them control of reapportionment. And it's something that, you know, has been neglected, and I'm glad to say now the Democrats are all exploding with interest in what's going on at the state level, what's going on in state legislatures, what's happening in governor's races. And I think that the important thing to understand is, and the piece I wrote is called "When They Go Low, We Go Local," about organizing from the ground up. And honestly, this would have been a very, very deep problem. You know, had Hillary Clinton been rightfully elected, we still would have this problem to deal with. We have to get down at the grassroots level and win back from the grassroots up. And that's what we have started to do. The opposition from voters and the energized and the empowerment of voters now through a lot of websites that have sprung up. Indivisible's become very famous. Flippable is a great site that tells you where you can look at state they're focused on state legislative districts and governor's races and AG's races. Swing left. There are all these different things that have come into being. There are these meetups and gatherings that are all over the state. I mean, traveling around, it's just remarkable. I mean, I was in Newburgh, and there were 500 people that got together one night there. Went to a meeting in Brooklyn that had over 1,000 people. This is not organized by any long-term institution. This is just the American people rising up and saying, we are not going to do this. It is wonderful. It is more activism and more energy that we've seen in decades, and we need to do this. It makes a tremendous difference if you speak up. It makes a tremendous difference if you go to your elected official's office, or if they're not doing what you want. People demonstrate at their houses sometimes, or their offices, and that actually has an impact. People in the state government, people don't realize how few people over the last 20 years or so would really get engaged and show up in a state legislator's office or a member of Congress's office and actually demand action. This is getting a response. People are responding to this. You saw the town hall meetings that a lot of these Republicans encountered when they went home on the health care bill. This has a huge impact. And you know, Democrats in Congress, God bless them, the tougher you are with them, the tougher they're going to be with the opposition. So this new fierceness that you're seeing is not just because everyone changed their diet and has eating healthier breakfast. This is because they are feeling this from their constituents, and they have to act. So that's tremendously important, but also understanding where we have points of leverage. And I have to say that it has been an amazing process over the last few months, not just the emergence of state attorneys general as a leading edge of the legal resistance, but public awareness growing of that and of what we're doing and what we can do. And that is actually helping me, because that's helping nudge some of my more recalcitrant colleagues into being more active and being more aggressive. And we have now gone from a situation where occasionally Democratic AGs, we get together informally and be on an amicus brief together or circulate things. We now have weekly calls to talk about what's coming. We get daily, in my office, we do daily updates because, you know, the stuff, it's very easy to get distracted by, you know, something that's just sort of noise and craziness. Or things like, oh, Barack Obama tapped my phone. You could spend a couple of days running around chasing that. You know, Rudy Giuliani said, oh, I had a commission to issue a report on the Muslim ban. Of course, that he acknowledged today, he just made that up. So it's like, you remember when he was mayor, he used to give statistics about crime, and then after a while the reporters started checking them and was like, burglaries aren't down by 13%. He's just making this up. So for those of you who didn't catch it today, he acknowledged that he didn't actually have a commission to study the law and make a recommendation to the president about this.
And he said he didn't make any recommendations to the president. Oops.
Oops. Oh, well. So look, it is important, but as Liz said at the very beginning, it is important to keep our eye on becoming a movement for positive change, too. People want universal health care now. That time has come. People want equal justice under law. Most Americans do not want to go back. They have accepted the LGBT community. We have some progress still to make, and there's some barriers still to push through. But I do think the overwhelming majority of Americans are with us on these fundamental issues. And if you look at you know, the polling supports all this. Americans think too many people are in prison, that we should reform our criminal justice system, which is true. And support raising a minimum wage. So we have to just stay true to these principles and these values and push ahead in spite of folks who say, well, you know, you always have to tack to the center and be careful. The public is not looking for carefulness right now. You may not have noticed this, but there's been the outpouring of public anger at the status quo. I mean, keep in mind, Trump took out all of the establishment Republicans in the primary before he beat Hillary in the general. This was not a repudiation of the Democratic Party. This was a repudiation of the status quo. And that's something we have to take advantage of. We have to go out to meet that anger and offer something better. I think he's going to do a great job of demonstrating that he does not have the solution to people's problems. I think that he will be... he will open a door, but we have to be ready to go through that door. We have to have a Democratic Party that stands for something and is not wishy-washy about things like, is a woman's right to choose something that is sort of on an optional list? No, it's a fundamental issue of human freedom, right? It's just not optional. So once we have the clarity that I think most of our constituents have, I think we're going to be in a great position to move the country forward. Is there going to be pain between now and then? Are people going to get hurt? Yes. And we have to do everything we can do in state and local government to mitigate that pain. And every time we can slow them down or stop them through our litigation or through a lobbying effort, we pried away for the first time on a really critical environmental rule. We pried away enough Republicans for the first time to stop them from repealing an Obama-era regulation under the Congressional Review Act on this very important rule restricting methane emissions. So this is a hugely important greenhouse gas victory. And I'm looking forward to more Republicans having the courage to cross on over and do the right thing.
So what do we all do tomorrow? I get asked all the time, should I focus on one issue and really just go down that road, or should I read every email and listserv I get every day and just keep responding and sending out my emails and making my calls to whoever I'm told I should be doing something to today? And you can feel overwhelmed and also go, it's all too much. I don't know what to do or what to do first. What's your suggestion on how we best organize to use our power? Because here we are in the liberal ghetto of New York City, where, right? You can get angry at a bunch of us who represent you, but not so much as it turns out compared to what's really going on out there. So what is the best way for people to become part of this winning plan for us to take it back?
Look, I think first of all, this is going to be in for the long haul, so everyone do what you can do to sustain yourself. That's why having these collectives and groups that people are a part of, whether it's on the internet or better yet in person, is so important. Because look, we have to sustain ourselves. This is going to be a struggle, and sustaining a struggle requires a sense of solidarity and a sense of collegiality, and collective action for the common good is actually an incredibly inspiring experience. It's just wonderful working for social change in a group. So that is critical, and I think that you have to go with what's in your gut. Whatever you are the most passionate about is what you're going to be the most effective as an advocate for. You don't have to cover every single issue, and I mean, I have all these great lawyers and all these great bureaus, but just keeping up with the information from my own office can be overwhelming on any given day. I would urge you to focus first on the substance, efforts that they are making that would hurt people on issues like immigration or taking away health care or taking away, Medicaid benefits and meals on wheels, if you can believe this is what they're proposing, which I don't think it's going to actually come back out of Congress. But we have to understand where they're actually doing things that affect people and that hurt people and that affect people's lives. Distinguish that from some of the personally offensive stuff that may be getting done or getting said that is more noise than it is substance, because they're slipping through a lot of really dangerous stuff that almost doesn't get attention because of the flamboyant, bizarre conduct that's sort of at the top of every day's news. And for example, they're trying to undo the rules that provided us with net neutrality, and there's a whole effort being made we think that to falsely create the impression there are a lot more people in support of that position than there are. So there are, at every level, there are things that people are passionate about. But if you're passionate about reproductive rights, that's tremendously important. They are reproductive health providers every possible way they can. We need everybody on board and to understand that struggle. In addition to the other offensive qualities, this bill, the American Health Care Act, whatever passed the House, identified a category of prohibited institutions, but the definition was such that only one organization in the country fit within the definition, Planned Parenthood. So it's clear they're doing that. At the state level, they're trying to defund Planned Parenthood and restrict abortion rights in both, and we're in appellate courts in both the Midwest and the South on that. So if that's what you're passionate about, go for it, but find a way for you to sustain yourself in the effort. It is good to know everyone who represents you and make sure they know that you're watching, and it's good to voice support for people who are doing the right thing. That means a lot. That means a lot. I mean, small contributions to people means a lot, and you should reward people who do the right thing. And I don't have to tell people this because apparently Democrats and activists have lost whatever was left of their shyness, but you got to get in the face of the people who are not doing the right thing. And I think that the response of activists and the response of people who weren't active before, but have now, woken up and are now becoming active has been tremendously gratifying to watch. This is something a lot of us have been waiting for. And it took this to bring it about, but we've got to take advantage of this as an opportunity.
Thank you. So now we're going to get into the questions part. And I have some fabulous questions here from the audience. I just want to remind everybody, and just so, because Eric would say it also, he can't answer questions about ongoing investigations. He's not allowed to. He's the top lawyer for New York State. He's the Attorney General. So even if some of us dream that he's figured out a way to put so-and-so Donald Trump in jail, if there's any kind of active investigation, he can't answer. So just know if I come across those kinds of questions, I won't actually be asking. But if he comes to some point where he has to say, I'm actually not allowed to go any further with that, we have to respect that, okay? Because we want him to do his job correctly on all of our behalf. And there's some more cards that people are holding up. So it touches right on what you were talking about. What can we do to expand voting rights? We're 48th out of 50th in the country for voter participation. I don't know if people understand what that means, that we're like the second worst in the country.
Yeah, there are...
Nobody votes here.
There are cases in which efforts to limit early voting, lawyers have defended that in court, saying, well, at least we're maintaining a little bit of early voting. Look at New York. So they're using us as a bad example to defend their efforts to roll back voting rights in other states. Last year's election had so many problems. We've always had an election day hotline, or we have since I became Attorney General, for people to call in complaints. And last year, in 2016, we had a whole series of elections, and our phones were ringing off the hook because of all the problems. So we did look into it and issued a report in December about all of the different problems with registration, different problems with actually trying to vote on Election Day. And in response to that, introduced an omnibus bill, the New York Votes Act, really laying out all of the things that we should fix in our voting system. And we should have universal registration, which works really well. They have it in other states where any contact with a state agency is presumptively an application to register. And you can say, I don't want to, but they'll move you ahead and get the rest of the information. Early voting, it solves a host of problems. Increases turnout, reduces lines, so there are a lot of provisions. Everything that we are proposing has been done somewhere else, done successfully. It's not sort of pie in the sky or that far out there. And I think that the ugly secret in New York is that incumbents traditionally of both parties have said, well, more people voting makes more trouble for incumbents. And they've gotten away with that. I think the public is onto that, and I think that the demand is there. But this is something that has to be right at the heart of our platform and how we're going to make people's lives better. People want to feel that their democracy is working. People want to feel empowered. They are willing to put up with a lot. People will wait online to vote. They shouldn't have to, and you don't have to in 2017 in New York. There's a lot of low-lying fruit here. There are a lot of things we can fix very easily. But as Liz said, for us to be behind jurisdictions that we tend to think of as, relatively conservative or not innovative, we're behind almost everybody, and that's something that has to change.
Absolutely. We, in fact, had a debate yesterday on the floor of the Senate around a bill. We still can't successfully merge the federal primary and the state primary in New York. And we debated a bill that my Republican colleagues, I will be partisan on this one, have, that wants to move primary day to the third week in August. And we all keep saying that's the worst possible date you could imagine to encourage people to vote, right? People are finishing up summer vacations. People are getting their kids ready for school. College students who often register to vote from their college campuses aren't back at college at the third week of August, which someone quietly explained to me that's what they want, to make sure young people are not voting in primaries from their college campuses. So something as easy, you would think, as to pick a reasonable date to be able to do both sets of primaries together. No, we are still struggling with that obvious, and you're absolutely right about early voting. Anyone who stood in line during the presidential election days and wondered, how can I actually be here for 2.5 hours just to put a piece of paper in a machine, right? We can do, right, well, so we can do better. Okay, so this is an endless issue in my district office and then probably even as the Attorney General. What are we doing to protect tenants from bad landlords?
Well, our office has, actually we've made some structural changes to how the Attorney General's office deals with this issue because when I became Attorney General, the market was so hot that the incentive for a landlord to get a rent-regulated tenant out was just so great that people were trying things that they would never have tried before under other circumstances. We're seeing a lot of abusive conduct. So we realized that it was fragmented over too many agencies. So we formed a joint tenant harassment prevention task force with the key city agency, Housing Preservation Development, with the key state agency, DHCR, and actually have gotten the city and state agencies to work well together, and they combined with my office. We've investigated a lot of cases. We brought civil cases. We have brought criminal cases. But as we pursued criminal cases against landlords, we realized that the only cases we could pursue were under things like the larceny statute or fraud statutes, because the penal law provision criminalizing tenant harassment is so weak. It's something that where the standard is so high that no one has been successfully prosecuted under this statute. I mean, it's been around for a while, and no one has ever gone to jail. So what it requires is for a landlord with the intention to get someone to move out of a rent-regulated apartment to take actions, but you have to cause physical harm to the tenant. So it's just an unreasonable standard. Even if you get these situations where there's no heat in the winter, there's dust blowing in, and there's all sorts of dangers to people and open stairwells and things like that, and that didn't meet the standard. So I introduced a bill, and I think Senator Krueger is now carrying it in the Senate, which would change the standard for the tenant harassment. They'll take away this requirement for physical injury, make it much easier to prosecute, because criminal actions do get people's attention. We have also been involved in a lot of actions just to get people their money back and get people their rights back, and in some cases gotten phony condos and co-ops decertified. But it is an area that is, I would say that the city has responded. They put up a lot of money for these efforts, and since we started the task force in 2015, we have got a more coordinated effort than we've ever had before. Now, it's important for everybody to understand, we thrive on information, and we've had some really successful cases, but it's all based on the information we can get from people. We're taking out Steve Croman and taking out other bad landlords like that is all, thank you. It all depends on people coming forward and stepping up. So Liz mentioned my website, www.ag.ny.gov. Go look around, you'll find whatever you're interested in and ways to communicate with us also.
I think you even had a story in the paper today about your office challenging banks who lend money to real estate companies who mathematically couldn't possibly be able to pay back the money unless they're throwing out all their tenants.
Correct.
That is evidence that they are,
So this was a breakthrough because this got to the folks who are financing these bad activities. And if you look at something where you're making a loan, and the only way the loan could possibly be paid off is if they get rid of all the rent-regulated tenants in an unbelievably short time period, we were able to impose liability there. So that we are prepared to try things that haven't been tried before, and I like creativity in the law. But look, and you mentioned, actions and investigations. I was very proud to represent all of you and people of the state of New York v. Donald Trump, Trump University et al. Case which we, in spite of his protestations and him suing me for $100 million and filing phony ethics complaints against me, he ended up paying a lot of money. And I realized in the end of January, there are likely to be a lot of cases that are people of the state of New York v. Donald Trump et al. And in the future. So we're not going to be shy about that. So you will be there in court with us in spirit and in the caption in a lot of these cases. And but we are really trying to make sure that we are very, very careful to make sure it's about the merits. It is about substance. You never want to be seen as reaching for him just because he drives us crazy or he's offensive or something like that. We have to take him down on the substance and on the merits, and that's what we're focusing on.
Thank you. Somebody raising that under one of the many strange executive orders signed by the president, he appears to be in violation of the Johnson Amendment and allowing tax-exempt religious institutions to become actively involved in politics. Can you explain to us a little bit about what that means for all of us here?
Well, he issued an executive order that actually, when you read it, didn't do any. One of the things about the president is he, as with the sort of chest pounding, we're going to bankrupt every sanctuary jurisdiction and take all their money, and then it turns out they can't really do that. So he issued something that said it was going to be freeing up religious institutions to be more involved in politics. But if you read the executive order itself, it actually didn't do anything. It did so little that folks at the ACLU said, we're not even going to respond to this. This is just like, there's nothing to even fight about here. So it was another thing. It was like sort of another Giuliani commission. It's sort of not, he has used a lot of rhetoric about the oppression of particular, well, he specifies which religions he cares about, but, and the desire to do that, but he has not really done anything to affect that yet. So, but we're very alert to it, and, we regulate nonprofits at the state level in a more modest way than the IRS does at the federal level, but we're involved in that area, and we're sensitive to these issues. And I don't think, I think everyone should enjoy freedom of religion and be able to practice, but the line between church and state is another thing that is absolutely fundamental to our republic. That was the basis of our case against the Muslim ban, and this is something that we're going to be militant about looking at, where it is a critical aspect of the rule of law in America, and it was very much on the mind of the founders, and we have a very strong basis for challenging any moves that would undermine that.
Great. So I admit this one I know nothing about, so I'm hoping you'll understand. So apparently, Jeff Sessions is trying to implant an obscure rule to prevent lawyers from assisting immigrants, as they did on January 27th at our airports. The rule would state that attorneys cannot provide legal assistance if they are not the attorney hired to represent an individual through the court proceeding. Does this one ring a bell at all, that they're trying to do this?
But Attorney General Sessions has, look, he's allowed to try, and we're allowed to stop him, I guess. I mean, it's just, this is, he's been floating a lot of these sorts of proposals. The problem is that, as I said before, it will hurt people they will hurt their own supporters with this. I mean, this is something. And I'm pleased to say that even, there are disagreements, and there are disagreements among lawyers, but even some of my more conservative colleagues, there really is a sense that, going after lawyers, going after judges, going after the rule of law, this is something that has really led to this sense of solidarity and of what I call the legal resistance. I've had meetings with people who are senior partners at major corporate law firms. I guess they're essentially facing revolt from their associates if they don't do something. We're saying, what can we do? Can we do research projects? Can we take this on? And we're getting a huge outpouring of support, and outpouring of support for legal organizations that need the help. And with the state of New York, you put up some money for groups that defend immigrants' rights, that provide representation. You can get a lawyer if you're an immigrant in the state of New York. Resources are available. The New Americans hotline is something you can go to our website and find it, but that's something that everybody should know. And I do believe the right to a lawyer is an important right that enables you to protect all your other rights. So I'm seeing a lot of outpouring from members of the bar now, and everyone should take advantage of it. But no one in New York should face any fundamental decision like losing your home or dealing with an immigration issue without having a lawyer.
Okay. Another technical legal question. Which court will ultimately decide on the Clean Power Plan case? Is that the Supreme Court or a lower court that?
I mean, the Supreme Court does have to decide and it's actually we're awaiting the Supreme Court right now. So there is a case there's a case that stayed the Clean Power Plan that came out of an appellate court, and there's a question of the jurisdiction of that court that is before the Supreme Court right now. But our group of interveners, the 25 state and local governments that I'm leading, are in that case. So we're going to be with it as it rides up and down, and it's probably going to be a long journey through the litigation process on that one.
So time is short. I have so many more questions, and I've just been told two more questions. So I'm looking for juicy ones.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so.
Yes or no question.
Yes or no. Oh, those are so, they're rarely yes or no.
The speed round.
Right. As a lawyer, not necessarily as RAG representing us, but as a lawyer, do you think impeachment is possible?
Anything is possible. Never ask that question. They teach you that the first week of cross-examination class. Look, this is something not to be taken lightly. It is very serious. It is a slow process, and it is essentially a political decision. So this requires the evolution of consciousness of people in Congress, which I think is in fact evolving, and we'll see what happens. But again, it is wrong for anyone to suggest that there are grounds for impeachment, that the case is over, the investigations are completed. There are inquiries going on, there are questions being raised, there'll be other questions raised. There's some things going on that just haven't been publicized yet. But I think that the scrutiny, the level of scrutiny that the government is getting is appropriate. I don't think it is in any way, shape, or form different than scrutiny that other governments have gotten. I just think their conduct has been more flamboyantly outrageous. So, but I don't want to feed into this, no one in history has been persecuted the way I'm persecuted or treated worse than I've been treated, including the presidents who were assassinated. They weren't treated as badly as I've been treated. Let's be careful not to feed into that. Let's be careful to be, we got to beat this guy, as I said, on the merits. And if he does something that crosses the line, certainly the bright lights are on. But I think let's not let that distract from the work we need to do on the substantive level in terms of these policies, the work we need to do electing people from the grassroots up. If he goes tomorrow and we are looking at President Mike Pence, which is no ticket to paradise, we have the same legal and political work to do. And Mike Pence, let me remind you, this guy is, he's got these kind of views on life out of the Spanish Inquisition. He's really, I believe, sponsored Indiana bill that if you have an abortion, you have to have a funeral for the fetus. He will not meet with women after dark without his wife there. It's like, we're not, there's no door number 2 that brings you back to normal here. So the political work is going to have to continue. Last one.
I'm definitely stealing that line later, okay? No door number 2 that brings you back to normal. But right here now on the ground, people are so worried about immigrants' rights here, even though you explained very explicitly, that they can't do all these things they say they're going to do. The executive orders are unconstitutional. But when you read the papers, it appears that ICE does seem to be showing up in our communities. They've been showing up at ethnic restaurants. They showed up at a school looking for a 4th grader.
Actually, that turned out not to be true.
Okay. So what are people's rights, and who do they call when they think, something's happening? And do dreamers have to go hide? Should they be keeping their children home from school? What's our recommendation?
So this is a very challenging area, because while we've had some substantial victories for people who don't have documents, it's still a very, very scary time. I think we have to be very careful about, because the story just spread all over the place that they showed up after a 4th grader. It turned out it was the Immigration Naturalization Services who are actually trying to process someone's application to stay here, and we're checking on a student's enrollment. So schools are, like religious institutions and political demonstrations, hospitals, are designated as sensitive areas that ICE is supposed to stay away from. Our efforts to get courts designated as such have not succeeded up until now, but that's something that's a part of a national push, that people should be allowed to come to court. It doesn't seem that unreasonable. So it's challenging, because we've put out a guidance for tenants, immigrant tenants, and making it clear that you have all of your rights under all of New York's rent laws, and the human rights law prevents you from discrimination. But that doesn't mean we can guarantee you that we can stop your landlord from making a phone call. The one thing you can't do is stop people from reporting what they believe to be an undocumented immigrant. And people do have fear. We have taken great care, and I've sent, along with the State Education Commissioner, guidances to all of the school districts in the state and all of the schools individually about what they have to do to protect immigrant students. And schools have turned away people who have come to question students inappropriately. So schools should be a safe zone, but I know there are a lot of folks who are, who are concerned about going out and driving and showing up, and this is, it's the critical thing, I would say, for anyone who is worried about their immigration status is call the New Americans Hotline, and you can find it on my website at ag.ny.gov, but this is something that's funded by the state. There are resources that have been given to the Vera Institute and other organizations to represent immigrants just in the state budget that was just passed, so there are resources there. Everybody should check with a lawyer, and we don't want people to live in fear. Look, this is part of our argument on the immigration ban. Almost 23% of the people in the state of New York, the entire state, were born somewhere else. It's just a staggering number. People don't realize it in New York City how much this is true in other parts of the state as well. We live off of the flow of immigrants. This is what makes things work. This is what makes our economy work. And when we fought those cases, we had tremendous support from the business community. They were all opposed to this immigration ban, the finance sector, the tech sector, the healthcare sector. So it is important for people to move about, do what they're doing, go about their business. Is there a basis for fear? Yeah, there is. In almost all cases, you're probably safe going about your business, sure, but no one of us want to be someone to, that one chance that you take that ends up with you getting picked up is something scary. So we're encouraging everyone to see lawyers, and we're doing everything we can do to ensure that the secure jurisdictions are still secure, and schools are overwhelmingly safe, and hospitals are safe, and religious observances are safe. Public demonstrations are another safe zone that you should be allowed to do. So this is something that is a deep challenge, but I think anyone who cares about this, they have not, even though they've made noises about it, they cannot criminalize helping your neighbors and your friends. They cannot criminalize sending people to lawyers. And we have to do everything we can do to protect people until we work our way out of this, because we will work our way out of this. The American experience is an immigrant experience, and we all understand how rich and how strong our pluralism and our diversity makes us, and the source of innovation and ideas. This is what the country is about. We've had periods of xenophobia and nativism sporadically throughout American history, but we will work our way through this. We will get beyond this, and the goal now is to ensure that as few people are hurt as possible as we get there, and as you turn from being the resistance to being the next great American movement for progressive social and economic change.
So there were a whole series of variations on the same question that I actually think are for me, but tie directly back to what Eric's been saying. Many of the questions were about, so when is the New York State Senate actually going to move important progressive democratic bills? Especially since apparently there are 32 of you now, but you're not actually in control of the chamber. So much of Eric's presentation has been about the importance of states' rights, and that we can have good, strong laws here in New York State that can help protect us, even if the interesting people in Washington are inventing their own definition of the Constitution and the country. But it's true, we need to pass good modern laws. We need to pass my Reproductive Health Act. We need to pass protections bills that we don't have on the books now. And the answer, I think, for the audience is we need to make it clear that we need a Democratic Senate, and that where the majority leader is the Democrat, not the Republican. Why? Because you name any bill you want, there's only one person who gets to decide whether it comes to the floor for a vote or not, and that's John Flanagan, who's the Republican majority leader. And yes, he's in that position because Democrats joined him in a coalition. We need them to act like Democrats as they were elected to be and join with Democrats. Nobody has to sit in the same room all the time. No one has to like each other. But until we have a Democratic leader establishing what bills come to the floor. The bills Eric Schneiderman knows the state of New York needs, the bills I know the New York State needs aren't going to move to the floor, where I believe we do have the votes and that any number of Republicans would come across the aisle and vote for it if they came to the floor, but they aren't getting there now. So that's a mixed answer to a whole series of questions that I really do think were directed at me, but I want to leave Eric the last word.
Oh, okay, I thought we were closing with the word from our sponsor. Thank you. Look, it's always good to be here with you, and it is true that when I first went to the Senate and was very aggressive about recruiting people to run for office, not knowing that that was not something that either the Democratic or Republican Senate leaders really wanted to see happen at the time, Liz did come out and run again and again and again, and to beat a whole series of Republicans in very quick elections, it seems, on the East Side, and has just been a terrific champion, great colleague, and a great advocate ever since. The prospects for us in New York are tremendous. I mean, the upside of having a lot of this low-lying fruit hanging out there is that there's a lot that's really within our grasp. But I would come back to the fundamental point. This is about more than just one election or one bill. This is really about, and when we were talking about this, we were talking about how people's consciousness has shifted, like things on equality and on health care and I believe on the criminal justice system. I think things, and that's a sign that movement building is going on. That's a sign that you're moving the envelope, you're changing the way people see issues, the way people talk about issues, the way they frame issues. So the movement to take things back is a movement to re-envision ourselves as a stronger, more connected, more compassionate country that moves forward together. This is a collectivist enterprise. It always has been. And I think that we're being reminded of that in a big way by these jarring, discordant notes that are really striking a lot of people who have not really felt like they didn't really have to pay much attention and things were just going to tool along okay. That's not true anymore. People are paying attention, continue to pay attention, encourage your friends to pay attention, go to our websites, and stay engaged. Stay engaged. This is a great time, and if find out what's happening in other places in the country. There's this huge focus. The campaigns begin now with these special elections. 2017, everything is up in New Jersey and Virginia. I've been doing things to help the Virginia Attorney General, Mark Herring, and that he's a key part of our coalition. And then in 2018, everything else is on the table. But the way we sustain this is to understand that this is about building really a movement for equality and justice, not just about winning one election, but about establishing these principles and making sure that after we elect people, they continue to feel that pressure to do the right thing, that support for doing the right thing. This was never designed to be a place where you vote and go home. That is not how our constitutional democracy is set up to work. For a while, last 20 years or so, the other side has been much more active after Election Day than we have, and this is the result you get, this dialing back. Now now the scales are being evened up, and the outpouring of energy has just got to continue. So celebrate it, thank people for doing the right thing, thank people for speaking up, and stay aggressive. This is what the United States was designed to be, and it will be a great disappointment if New Yorkers were not in the lead of this movement as we have been in the lead of some.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric Schneiderman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was fun.
You want to take that off and leave it? Thank you, everyone.